Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was a late autumn night when Jenna decided to stop at a gas station on the outskirts of a small town. The place was eerily quiet, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs that buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Jenna was tired after a long drive and just wanted to fill her tank and grab a quick snack before hitting the road again. As she pulled up to the pump, she noticed the old gas station attendant standing inside the dimly lit store, watching her through the window. He was an elderly man, with pale skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed too dark for a person alive. Jenna felt a chill but shrugged it off, convincing herself it was just the cold night air. When she went inside to pay, the bell above the door jingled in a way that sounded off, like a distorted, broken tune. The attendant greeted her in a voice so low it barely made sense. "You shouldn't be here this late," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Jenna laughed nervously, saying she was just passing through. As she reached for her wallet, she noticed the store was strangely empty. No snacks, no drinks, just rows of dusty shelves with nothing but old newspapers and faded photographs. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been breathed in for years. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. Jenna's heart pounded as the room plunged into darkness. The only light came from the gas pumps outside, casting eerie shapes through the glass. The attendant's voice dropped to a whisper, "You won't leave." Panicked, Jenna turned to run back outside, but the door slammed shut, trapping her inside. She fumbled for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then from the shadows, she heard the faint sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. She squinted into the dark, trying to make out a figure. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw something move. A pale hand with unnaturally long fingers, reaching for her. Jenna screamed and banged on the glass window, hoping someone outside would hear her. But the gas station sat isolated, miles from the nearest road. Just then, the lights flickered back on for a second, and Jenna caught a glimpse of the attendant's face, twisted, malformed, his eyes glowing with something not human. He smiled, revealing rows of jagged, sharp teeth. The door suddenly unlocked, and Jenna bolted outside, the cold night air hitting her like a wave. She jumped into her car and sped off, glancing in her rearview mirror to see the attendant standing in the doorway, motionless, staring after her. The next morning, when she called the police to report the gas station, they told her the place had been abandoned for years, shut down after a series of mysterious disappearances. No attendant, no gas pumps, no store, nothing but an empty lot. Jenna never stopped wondering what she saw that night. But one thing stayed clear. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and some horrors linger long after the lights go out.
Story number 2.
It was a late autumn night when Jenna was driving home after a long shift at the diner. The highway was nearly empty, the air crisp and biting through the thin fabric of her jacket. Her phone was almost dead, and the gas needle hovered just above empty. She knew she needed to stop soon, but the next town was miles away. Up ahead, she spotted a dimly lit gas station, its flickering neon sign buzzing faintly in the dark. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. A peeling paint exterior, a single pump standing under a flickering light, and a small convenience store that looked almost abandoned. But Jenna was desperate, so she pulled in. As she got out, the cold air seemed to grow heavier. The silence was thick, almost unnatural, except for the faint hum of the flickering sign. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on cracked linoleum floors and empty shelves. Behind the counter sat an old man, his face mostly hidden by the brim of a dirty baseball cap. He didn't look up as Jenna approached. She fumbled with the pump, the metal cold in her hands. Trying to stay calm, Jenna glanced toward the aisles. They were mostly bare, except for a few dusty cans of soda and some expired snacks. The silence was unsettling. "Pump stuck," Jenna said quietly to the man, who finally looked up. His eyes were cold, almost too still, and when he spoke, his voice was low and rough, like gravel sliding down a hill. "Sometimes it does," he said, then nodded toward the back of the store. "You can pay inside if you want." Jenna nodded and went inside. The bell above the door tinkled, but no one came to greet her. The place felt empty, yet it was too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. She walked toward the counter, trying to make out the man's face in the flickering light. As she got closer, she noticed something odd: a wall of old, yellowed newspaper clippings behind the counter. Most were about people who had gone missing near this stretch of highway, drivers who stopped here and were never seen again. The headlines were chilling, filled with stories of mysterious disappearances, strange sightings, and local legends warning people to avoid the station after dark. A sudden noise made her jump. The old man was staring at her, a strange smile creeping onto his lips. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Just filling up," Jenna replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He nodded slowly, then reached under the counter and pulled out a faded Polaroid. He slid it across to her. The photo showed a woman, her eyes wide with terror, standing in front of this very gas station. Behind her, shadows seemed to stretch out, almost like hands reaching for her. Jenna's heart hammered in her chest. She looked up, but the man was already turning away, his footsteps slow and deliberate. She tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The lights flickered violently, and Jenna heard whispers, soft, barely audible, coming from the walls. Cold fingers grazed her neck, and she spun around, but no one was there. Panic rising, she pounded on the door. It suddenly swung open, revealing the empty night outside, but the air was thick with an unnatural chill. She ran to her car, the engine barely starting. As she drove away, the station disappeared behind her in the rearview mirror. But for a moment, she thought she saw the old man standing right there on the cracked pavement, watching her go, his smile impossibly wide and cold. Jenna never stopped to get gas there again, but sometimes on lonely nights, when the road is empty and the wind whispers just right, she swears she can hear that flickering neon sign buzzing in the distance, and the faint sound of footsteps that don't belong to anyone on the road.
Story number 3.
It was just past midnight when Mark decided to stop at the lonely gas station on the outskirts of a small town. He'd been driving for hours on the winding, empty highway, and the flickering neon sign promised hot coffee and a quick break. The station looked ancient, the kind of place that seemed frozen in time, paint peeling from the walls, a few dusty pumps sitting idle under the dull glow of a single overhead light. The parking lot was empty, except for his car. Mark stepped inside, the bell above the door jangling eerily. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp shadows in the cramped convenience store. The air smelled stale, tinged with a strange metallic scent he couldn't place. The shelves were sparsely stocked, mostly dusty snack bags and expired cans. Behind the counter, an old man sat hunched over a newspaper, his eyes barely lifting when Mark approached. "Coffee?" Mark asked. The man nodded slowly, wordlessly sliding a steaming cup across the counter. Mark took it gratefully, but felt an immediate chill crawl down his spine. The air inside the store suddenly felt thick, suffocating, like he'd stepped into a trap. He glanced toward the door, but it was locked tight. Odd for a gas station. He tried to shake it off as paranoia and walked to the restroom out back, hoping to clear his head. As he passed the darkened corner near the exit, he noticed something odd, a pair of muddy boots just barely visible in the shadows. No one else was supposed to be here. Mark's heartbeat quickened. He stepped closer, squinting to see. The boots were scuffed and worn, but there was no sign of anyone attached to them. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a flicker, like a shadow sliding away just out of sight. He turned sharply. No one. Returning to the counter, he noticed the old man watching him with a strange intensity, eyes too wide and unblinking. "You shouldn't be here," the man whispered, voice cracking. "They don't like visitors after dark." Mark laughed nervously. "Visitors? What do you mean?" Before the man could answer, the lights flickered violently, plunging the store into near darkness. The hum of the neon sign outside warped and buzzed like static. Mark's stomach dropped as a sudden, gut-wrenching cold filled the room. From the corner, a low scraping noise began, a slow, deliberate sound like nails dragging across concrete. It grew louder, closer, circling the store. Mark's eyes darted around, heart pounding. The old man stood suddenly, pale and trembling. "Get out, now," he hissed. Mark rushed for the door, but the handle wouldn't budge. Panicked, he shoved harder. Outside, the scraping grew frantic, mixed with something else, a guttural growl, inhuman and desperate. He turned back toward the counter and saw them. Figures, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to suck the light from the room. They moved too fast, slithering through shadows like smoke surrounding him. Mark slammed into the glass display case, trying to find something, anything to defend himself. The last thing he saw before the lights cut out was the old man's face, twisted in horror, mouthing a silent warning. The next morning, the highway patrol found Mark's car abandoned by the gas station. The door to the store was finally unlocked, but the place was empty. No sign of Mark. The coffee cup sat on the counter, cold and full. Locals say the gas station has been closed for years, ever since a series of disappearances there. But late at night, some still claim to hear the scraping noise and see pale figures flickering behind the cracked windows, waiting for the next traveler to stop and never leave.
Story number 4.
It was just after 2 a.m. when Mason pulled off the empty highway, the low fuel light glowing a dim orange on his dashboard. He was halfway through a 10-hour overnight drive, trying to make it to his brother's house before sunrise. The gas station was the only building for miles. An old flickering sign that read "Gas and Go" stood crooked in the gravel lot, the harsh white lights above the pumps buzzing like flies. Inside his car, the radio had gone static 30 miles ago. No signal, no cell service either. The place looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. Dusty windows, yellowed by age. One of the neon letters in the open 24 hours sign was half lit, giving it a stuttering, almost desperate appearance. But he was out of options. The tank was nearly dry. As he stepped out, the air hit him, cold and unnaturally still. No wind, no crickets, nothing. Just the hum of those overhead lights. The gravel crunched under his boots as he walked to the pump. He swiped his card. Declined. Tried again. Same result. Annoyed, he glanced toward the station's front door. The inside was dim, the fluorescent lights flickering on and off like a dying heartbeat. A figure stood at the counter, unmoving. Mason couldn't make out a face, but he could tell it was staring directly at him. He hesitated, then walked to the door. It squealed loudly as he opened it. The inside smelled like mildew, rust, and something metallic, something that reminded him of old pennies and dried blood. The air was stale, suffocating. The man behind the counter was pale, too pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. His eyes were sunken, wide, and unblinking. He never said a word. Mason cleared his throat. "Pump's not working. My card's getting declined." The attendant didn't respond. He simply pointed behind Mason toward the lot. Mason turned. Another car had pulled in silently, a matte black 70s-style sedan. The windows were tinted pitch black. He hadn't heard it approach. There was no engine noise, no crunch of gravel, no headlights. It was just suddenly there. He turned back to the counter, but the attendant was gone. Not in the back, not crouched down, just gone. A sharp clatter echoed from one of the aisles. Mason jumped. He peered down it. Rows of outdated snacks, old magazines, nothing. And then the lights went out. Everything. He stood frozen in pitch black, his pulse hammering in his ears. After what felt like a full minute, the lights snapped back on now, and every aisle was filled with people, or what looked like people. They stood completely still. Each one had the same glassy, lifeless eyes. Some wore gas station uniforms, some old biker jackets, some in outdated business suits, but none of them moved. Their heads were all slightly tilted, all staring at him. He stumbled backward, knocking over a wire rack of lighters. He turned to bolt for the door, but the glass was now just black. Not like night black, like nothingness, like it didn't exist anymore. He pounded on it anyway, screaming, trying to find some crack or seam. The door didn't budge. When he turned around again, the rows of people had disappeared. The store was empty again, and the man behind the counter was back. "You pumped?" he asked in a voice that was too smooth, too wrong, like a tape played backward. Mason couldn't speak. The man's smile widened. "Tank's full now. You're ready to go." Without thinking, Mason ran out. This time, the door opened. He didn't look back. He jumped in the car, turned the key. The gauge showed a full tank. He drove, fast. The gas station disappeared into the black behind him like it had never existed. About 30 miles later, he pulled into a well-lit truck stop to catch his breath. He stumbled inside, face pale, hands shaking. The cashier gave him a strange look. "You all right, man?" Mason nodded, still not fully able to speak. The cashier tilted his head. "You driving the black sedan out there?" Mason blinked. "What?" No, I'm in the blue Civic. The cashier frowned and pointed out the window. Parked next to Mason's car was the same matte black sedan. Windows still pitch dark, engine silent. But this time, someone was sitting in the driver's seat, watching him.